I saved a starving Apache child. Then 3 women stayed over with me. It was the kind of morning that felt ordinary, peaceful even, but he had no idea that this day would change his life forever. He liked walking alone sometimes, enjoying the silence, letting his thoughts wander without interruption. Today, however, his steps faltered when he saw something unusual in the distance. At first, he thought it was a small animal, perhaps a fox or a stray dog. But as he came closer, he realized it was a child. The child was sitting alone by the edge of a narrow creek, hunched over, shivering slightly despite the warm morning sun. His clothes were torn and dirty, and his tiny frame looked painfully thin. The man slowed down, unsure if he should approach. The child's hair was matted and his small hands were dirty, covered with dried mud and scratches. The sight pulled at something deep inside him. He crouched a few steps away, keeping his voice soft. "Hey there, are you okay?" he asked gently. The child flinched, pulling back as if the words themselves might hurt him. His eyes were wide, dark, and filled with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The man realized that rushing in would not help. He needed patience. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small bottle of water and a wrapped piece of bread he had packed for himself. Holding them out slowly, he said, "I'm not going to hurt you. Here, eat a little if you're hungry." The child's eyes flickered toward the food. Hunger was obvious in the way his small frame trembled and how his fingers reached out almost involuntarily. Slowly, he crawled forward, cautious, almost as if he feared it was a trap. The man stayed still, giving him the time he needed. Finally, the child took the bread, holding it close to his chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. As the child ate, the man noticed the deep scratches on his arms and legs and small bruises that spoke of hardship. He wanted to ask questions, but words were difficult to find. The child's voice was soft, almost a whisper, I'm alone." His words were barely audible, but they hit the man like a hammer. Alone. No parents. No one to care for him. Just a small child left to survive on his own. The man's heart tightened. He knew he couldn't leave him there. There were dangers on these plains, wild animals, harsh weather, and the chance of getting lost. But he also knew that taking the child with him was a huge responsibility. He paused, weighing his options. Yet seeing the child's fragile state made the decision easy in his heart. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to be alone anymore. Come with me. I'll help you." His grip was weak, but it was there. They walked slowly together, the man speaking softly, trying to ease the child's fear. On the way back, the man noticed how thin and frail the child really was. His feet were blistered and dusty, his clothes torn in several places. The child stumbled a few times, and each time the man caught him, supporting him with care. It was a quiet walk, filled with small gestures of trust, reassuring words, gentle guidance, and shared silence. For the child, every small step felt like a giant leap. When they reached the man's home, a modest cabin at the edge of the plains, the child looked around in awe. The inside was simple but clean, with a small fireplace and shelves filled with everyday items. The man guided him to a chair and offered water again. The child drank slowly, careful not to spill. Then he looked at the man, eyes still full of uncertainty, and whispered, "Why are you helping me? You're not alone anymore." The child looked down, fidgeting with his hands, still unsure if he could trust these words. But slowly, the tension in his small body began to ease. Over the next few hours, the man did everything he could to make the child comfortable. He offered food, which the child ate slowly, savoring every bite. He found a clean set of clothes for him, gently washing the dirt from his arms and face. The child was shy at first, hesitant to respond to questions, but gradually, as the warmth of the cabin surrounded him, he began to speak. He told fragments of his story, about how he had wandered away from home, about hunger and fear, about nights spent alone under the cold sky. Each word was filled with sadness, but also with resilience. The man listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. He understood that trust could not be rushed. The child's small hand would occasionally brush against his as if seeking reassurance, and each time the man's heart filled with a mix of sorrow and hope. He realized that one act of kindness, simply noticing a child in need, had opened a door to something far deeper than he had imagined. As the evening approached, the man built a small fire in the fireplace and showed the child how to warm himself. They sat together in silence for a while, the crackling fire filling the room with a sense of calm. The man could see the exhaustion in the child's eyes. Finally, he helped him to a small bed, tucking him in gently. The child looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear and whispered, "Thank you." There would be challenges, questions, and perhaps even dangers, but he also knew that turning away was never an option. Compassion had brought them together, and now it was up to him to protect and guide this fragile life. As the night deepened, he sat quietly by the window, looking out at the stars above. The plains were silent, yet they felt alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. Something about this child's presence had awakened a new sense of responsibility, a new understanding of what it meant to care for another human being. The man realized that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that could not be measured. Sleep eventually came to him, though lighter and more alert than usual. He dreamed of the child running freely through the plains, laughing and safe, surrounded by care and love. The image stayed with him even when he awoke to the first light of dawn. He knew the journey ahead would be long, filled with hard decisions and unknown outcomes. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a deep, steady certainty. He had made the right choice. The morning sun rose fully, casting golden light across the plains. The child stirred, blinking sleepily, and the man greeted him with a smile. Today, they would take the first steps together toward recovery, trust, and a new life. And though the path was uncertain, the bond they had begun to form promised a story of hope that neither of them would forget. The morning sunlight poured gently into the cabin, filling the room with warmth. The child was awake, sitting quietly on the small bed, rubbing his eyes and trying to gather his courage for another day. The man brought him a simple breakfast, warm porridge, bread, and a cup of water. He set it carefully on the table, and the child began to eat slowly, still shy and uncertain, but clearly more comfortable than the day before. After breakfast, the man realized that he had to think about the next steps. He could not keep the child in his cabin forever. He knew the importance of finding the right help, someone who could ensure the child's safety and well-being. But the nearest authorities or organizations were far away, and the process was slow and complicated. For now, he had to take care of the child himself, at least until he could find a more permanent solution. He sat down across from the child and spoke gently. "We're going to make sure you're safe, fed, and warm for now, and then together we'll find a place where you can be properly cared for." "How does that sound?" The child nodded quietly. There was a hesitation in his eyes, a quiet fear of being disappointed or abandoned again. But the warmth and patience in the man's voice helped ease that fear. The day was spent quietly, with small tasks and gentle care. The man washed the child's clothes and prepared a small bath, carefully cleaning the dirt and scratches from his arms and legs. He worked slowly, letting the child guide him in what was comfortable. The child flinched at times, recalling past pain, but the man never rushed or forced him. He talked softly, telling small stories about his own childhood, about simple lessons he had learned, and about the kindness of strangers who had helped him along the way. As the afternoon sun rose higher, they ventured outside. The man led the child to a nearby creek to wash his face and hands, pointing out the smooth stones and the gentle flow of water. The child seemed captivated by the sound of the creek, the sunlight sparkling on the water. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to smile. It was small, fragile, but it was there, and the man felt a quiet relief in seeing that spark of life returning. Walking back to the cabin, the man began to ask small questions, trying to understand more about the child's past. "Where do you live? Who takes care of you?" he asked gently. The child's face darkened slightly. He looked down at his feet and whispered, I don't have anyone, my family, they're gone. His voice was small, almost like he was afraid that saying it aloud might make it true again. The man felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to say something that would erase the pain, but he knew words alone could not. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. I'm here now, he said softly, and I'll help you. You don't have to be alone anymore. The child nodded, a quiet tear rolling down his cheek, and for the first time he leaned slightly into the man's hand. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Evening approached and the man prepared a simple dinner. The child helped a little, learning to carry small plates and pour water. It was a small step toward independence, but also a moment of shared trust. They ate together, sitting quietly in the warm glow of the kitchen light. The man noticed the child's eyes following him, watching carefully, as if learning that someone could be kind without expecting anything in return. After dinner, the man suggested they take a short walk outside. The plains were calm, bathed in the soft colors of dusk. The child hesitated but eventually followed. They walked slowly, the man pointing out the shapes of trees and the sounds of birds returning to their nests. The child asked questions quietly, showing curiosity for the first time in days. Why do the birds come back every night? He asked. Do they have families too? They return to those who care for them, just like we return to those we trust and love. You will find that too, in your own way. The child seemed to consider this carefully, and for a few moments he walked in silence, letting the words sink in. When they returned to the cabin, the man set up a small corner with blankets and pillows for the child to sleep in. He could see that the child was tired, his body worn down by hunger and worry, but his eyes were a little brighter. The child crawled into the blankets and hugged himself tightly, still cautious but slowly learning to feel safe. The man sat nearby, reading quietly by lamplight, listening to the occasional sigh or quiet movement of the child settling in. Over the next several days, a routine began to form. The child ate regularly, slept safely, and began to regain strength. He started to open up more, telling small stories about his life before being alone, about simple joys and little fears. The man listened patiently, never interrupting, never dismissing his feelings. Every story, every shared smile, every small moment of trust helped to build a bond between them. Despite the progress, the man knew challenges lay ahead. There were practical concerns: how to find proper help, how to ensure the child's long-term safety, and how to respect his cultural background while offering care. He researched quietly, calling faraway authorities and organizations, learning about the processes and possibilities. But for now, the focus was on immediate care, on creating a sense of safety and stability that the child had never experienced before. One afternoon, the child fell asleep on the couch, while the man worked on the small tasks around the cabin. Looking at him, so peaceful for the first time, the man felt a surge of protectiveness. He realized that this was more than just helping someone in need. It was about nurturing a life, about showing that compassion could create trust and hope where fear and loneliness had once ruled. The man also noticed subtle changes in the child. He laughed more, though quietly, and started to ask questions about the world. He began to help with small chores, learning simple skills that gave him a sense of accomplishment. And perhaps most importantly, he started to let go of some of the fear that had haunted him. He still flinched sometimes, still worried, but the man's consistent presence helped to soothe those moments. One evening, as the man and the child sat by the fireplace, the child spoke softly, almost hesitantly. Do you think I will ever see my family again?" His voice was small, filled with hope but also fear. The man looked into his eyes, seeing both the child's vulnerability and his resilience. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but what I do know is that you are safe now. And that's the first step. We will find a way to help you, and until then, you are not alone." He knew the journey was only beginning, but this connection, fragile and new, was something worth protecting and nurturing. As the days passed, the child's health continued to improve. He grew stronger and his curiosity about the world returned. He started to ask questions about the man's life, his home, and even the small details of daily routines. The man answered patiently, sharing stories that were simple, honest, and kind. He knew that these moments were teaching the child about trust, patience, and the small joys that life could still offer. One afternoon, the child pointed to a small photograph on the wall. "Who is that?" he asked. The man explained softly that it was a family member long gone. The child's eyes widened and he was quiet for a moment. Then unexpectedly he said, I think I understand. People can be gone, but kindness can stay." The man nodded, feeling a warm sense of relief. The child's words, simple as they were, captured the essence of what they had been building together: hope, trust, and the quiet power of compassion. Evenings were their quietest times. They would sit together by the fire, the child sometimes drawing pictures in a small notebook, the man reading aloud from a book or telling stories about his own experiences. The cabin, once just a simple home, had become a place of safety and healing. And though the outside world remained uncertain, inside these walls there was peace. But even with these small successes, the man knew there was more to come. He had to plan for the future, for the child's long-term safety, and for the moments when he might not be able to be there. It was a heavy responsibility, but one he accepted willingly. The bond between them had grown strong, and he understood that caring for someone meant more than immediate needs. It meant trust, patience, and the courage to face uncertainty together. By the end of the second week, the child was noticeably stronger. He ran small distances around the cabin, laughed more freely, and even began to sleep through the night without fear. The man watched quietly, feeling a mixture of relief and quiet pride. The journey was far from over, but the first steps had been taken, and the child's fragile spirit was beginning to heal. And though he did not yet know what the future held, the man felt a deep sense of purpose. This child, alone and frightened just days ago, had opened his heart in ways he had never expected. And in return, he had given the child safety, comfort, and hope, the first gifts of a new life, waiting to unfold. The days had grown warmer and the plains were alive with the gentle sounds of life. Birds sang from the trees, the wind whispered across the tall grass, and the creek near the cabin flowed peacefully. The child had grown noticeably stronger, his small frame filling out, and his energy returning after weeks of hunger and fear. The man had settled into a quiet routine with him, caring for him, teaching him simple tasks, and listening to the fragments of his stories. One afternoon, as the man was preparing a small meal, a distant noise caught his attention. The sound of footsteps approaching the cabin was unusual. No one had come this way for a long time. He paused, holding a spoon midair, and squinted toward the path. Slowly, 3 figures appeared, moving carefully but with purpose. As they drew nearer, the man could see that they were women, dressed in simple clothing, their expressions wary but determined. The child, sitting at the table, froze. His small body tensed, and he instinctively hid slightly behind the man. The women stopped a few steps away, looking at him and then at the child. One of them stepped forward cautiously, her eyes soft but guarded. Is this our child?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of relief, worry, and uncertainty. The man nodded slowly. "Yes," he said gently. "He was alone. I found him and have been taking care of him." But the man remained calm, recognizing the delicate nature of the moment. He knew he had to show patience, respect, and honesty. The first woman, the one who had spoken, stepped closer. We wanted to make sure he was safe," she said. "We couldn't leave him alone." Her eyes softened as she looked at the child. The other 2 women nodded quietly, still observing, still cautious. The man gestured for them to come closer. "You're welcome here," he said gently. "I want him to be safe and happy, and I know you care for him." They stepped inside the cabin slowly, their eyes scanning the small room, taking in the fireplace, the simple furniture, and the warmth that radiated from the space. The child, still unsure, hid a little behind the man. The women noticed, and one of them knelt down to speak to him softly. "It's okay," she said. "We won't hurt you. We just want to be with you." The child looked up, uncertainty still in his eyes, but a small flicker of recognition passed across his face. That evening, the women stayed in the cabin. They had traveled a long distance, and the man had prepared extra blankets and food for them. The atmosphere was quiet but not tense. Conversations were soft, filled with careful words, mutual respect, and shared concern for the child. The man watched closely, learning about the women's background, their connection to the child, and the reasons they had been unable to reach him sooner. Each woman had her own story, and together they formed a picture of love, hardship, and dedication that had kept the child's memory alive even in absence. The child remained cautious at first. He had grown used to the man's care, his presence a constant source of safety. But as the evening went on, the women's gentle voices and careful movements reassured him. One of the women offered him a small piece of fruit, and he hesitated, then accepted it. Another told a quiet story, sharing a memory of his family and their traditions. Slowly, the child began to relax, realizing that these new visitors were not a threat, but people who cared deeply about him. Throughout the night, the man observed quietly. He noticed how the women interacted with the child, sometimes softly scolding him when he made a mess, other times laughing with him over small, playful moments. Their presence added a new dimension to the child's life. He had learned to trust the man, but now he saw that he could also trust others, people who loved him and wanted to help. The cabin, once a place of just two, now felt alive with shared concern, warmth, and humanity. The following day, the women helped with daily tasks. They worked together with the man to prepare food, clean, and care for the child. The child laughed more freely now, sharing small jokes and playful gestures with all of them. The women took turns reading to him, telling him stories, and teaching him small lessons about safety, hygiene, and respect for the world around him. It was a delicate balance, teaching him independence while also providing love and guidance. But slowly, they found a rhythm that worked for everyone. One afternoon, as the child played outside near the creek, the man noticed the women sitting together on a fallen log, speaking softly. He approached quietly, curious. They told him about their struggles, the long journey to find the child, and the fear that had accompanied them every step of the way. They had worried about his safety, about whether he had been treated kindly, about the loneliness and danger he might have faced. The man listened, realizing the depth of their devotion, and understood that compassion could take many forms, sometimes showing itself through travel, sometimes through protection, and sometimes through quiet, patient presence. The child eventually ran up to them, holding a small stick as if it were a treasure. "Look," he shouted excitedly. "I made a sword." The women laughed, the sound soft and joyful, and the man smiled quietly. The cabin was filled with warmth, laughter, and an energy that spoke of safety and care. The child's small voice carried the joy of a child who had not known play for a long time. And for the man, seeing this joy reaffirmed the importance of his decision to help when he had first found the child. As evening approached, the women prepared to settle in for the night. They had brought small blankets and personal items, and they arranged them carefully in the cabin. The man helped the child get ready for bed, tucking him in and gently reminding him that he was safe. The women took turns sitting nearby, speaking quietly to him, telling him stories, and ensuring that he was comfortable. The cabin, once a place of solitude, had become a sanctuary of shared care, love, and trust. That night, the man reflected on the past days. He had expected his act of kindness to be simple, helping a child in need, but it had grown into something much more profound. The presence of the three women, their dedication and care, had created a small community of trust and love. The child had grown stronger, both physically and emotionally, and he was beginning to understand that people could be kind, compassionate, and reliable. In the days that followed, the women shared stories of the child's past, filling in gaps and helping him remember his roots. They spoke of traditions, of family, of moments of happiness he had experienced before being alone. The child listened intently, sometimes smiling, sometimes quietly processing the emotions that arose. He had begun to understand that he belonged to a larger world, a network of care and love that extended beyond the cabin and beyond the plains. The man continued his role as a guide and protector, teaching the child skills for survival, sharing lessons about kindness, and helping him navigate the delicate balance of trust. The women, meanwhile, reinforced the child's cultural identity, ensuring that he remained connected to his heritage while also learning to trust new people. Together, they created a delicate harmony, one built on patience, respect, and shared love. One afternoon, the child approached the man with a small drawing he had made. It was a picture of the cabin, the creek, and the three women. He handed it to the man shyly. "For you," he whispered. The man took the drawing, feeling a warmth in his chest that words could not describe. The child's small gesture of gratitude, trust, and creativity symbolized the progress they had made together. He had begun to feel safe, cared for, and connected. As the evening sun set over the plains, the cabin glowed with warmth from the fire and the quiet voices of conversation. The child sat between the man and the women, listening, learning, and beginning to feel a sense of belonging he had not known in a long time. The man realized that this moment, fragile and beautiful, was the reward of patience, compassion, and courage. He had acted out of kindness, and that kindness had grown into something far greater than he had imagined, a small circle of trust, love, and healing. By the end of the week, the child's strength and confidence had grown even more. He ran, played, and laughed freely, and he had begun to form bonds not just with the man, but also with the three women who had come into his life. Together, they were creating a new family, one not bound by tradition or circumstance, but by shared care, respect, and unconditional love. And though the future was still uncertain, the man felt a deep sense of peace. He had saved a child in need, and that child had found not just safety, but trust, joy, and love. The arrival of the three women had added depth and meaning to the child's life, showing him that compassion could take many forms and that even in difficult circumstances, hope could flourish. The child finally fell asleep that night, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by people who loved him. The man and the women sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on the journey so far. They knew challenges lay ahead, but for now they had created a sanctuary of safety, trust, and warmth, a place where a child could begin to heal and grow. The morning sun rose gently over the plains, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The cabin, quiet and calm, seemed filled with a new sense of purpose. The child, now stronger and more confident, moved about with an energy that had been absent for weeks. He played near the creek, ran barefoot across the grass, and laughed freely, a sound that had once seemed impossible to hear. The man watched him carefully, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. The child's journey from fear and hunger to laughter and strength had been long, but every small step had been worth it. The three women who had stayed overnight and helped care for him were busy preparing a simple breakfast. Their movements were calm and purposeful, each woman focused on small tasks, yet all aware of the child's presence. They had formed a bond with him over the past few days, each finding ways to connect and reassure him. Their gentle guidance and careful words had given him a sense of family that he had almost forgotten existed. The man felt a quiet gratitude for their support. Together, they had created a safe space, a place where trust and care thrived. After breakfast, the group gathered around the table to discuss the next steps. The man knew that while the child had grown stronger, the ultimate goal was to ensure a safe and permanent home for him. They spoke about reaching out to authorities, finding reliable guardians, and reconnecting with the child's extended family or community. The women shared their knowledge of the child's background, traditions, and the cultural practices that were important to him. Their insights were invaluable, helping the man understand how to respect the child's heritage while providing care. The child listened quietly, absorbing the words and watching the adults speak with care. He had grown used to the man's presence, and now he was learning to trust the women as well. Slowly, he began to understand that he was not alone, that there were people who cared deeply about him, people who would protect him and guide him through uncertainty. His small hands fidgeted nervously, and then he spoke up. Will I be able to see you again?" he asked, looking at the man with wide, hopeful eyes. The man smiled gently. "Yes," he said. "No matter what happens, I will always care for you, and these women will help too. We're all here for you." The women nodded in agreement, their expressions softening. The child seemed reassured, and a small, genuine smile crossed his face. It was a moment of connection that spoke louder than words, a promise of care, trust, and love. Over the next few days, the man and the women worked together to prepare for the child's transition. They packed his belongings carefully, ensuring that he had familiar items from the cabin that would comfort him. Blankets, clothing, and a small notebook with his drawings were included. The child watched as they worked, understanding that changes were coming but feeling confident that they would be for his safety and well-being. He was beginning to see that the world could be kind, and that he could navigate it with guidance and love. The day finally arrived when they would take the child to a place where he could be properly cared for. The man and the women walked alongside him, holding his hands and offering quiet reassurance. The child's small steps were steady, but he occasionally glanced back at the cabin, as if saying a silent goodbye to the place where he had found safety and warmth. The man knelt beside him, gently adjusting his backpack and whispering, "You are ready. You've grown stronger, braver, and wiser. And you will continue to grow." They emphasized the importance of maintaining his cultural background and ensuring he felt safe and valued. The staff nodded, appreciating the careful preparation and understanding that had brought the child to them in such a stable state. The child took a moment to adjust, holding the man's hand tightly. "Will you come see me?" he asked, his voice small but earnest. The man knelt, looking into his eyes. "Yes," he said softly, "I will visit whenever I can, and you will always be in my thoughts." The women added their reassurance, telling him that he was loved and that they would continue to watch over him. The child nodded, finally letting go of his fear and trusting that this next step was safe. As the child settled into the care center, the man and the women stepped outside for a moment, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. The plain stretched endlessly around them, a reminder of the journey they had traveled together. The man felt a mixture of relief and quiet sadness. He had grown attached to the child, and saying goodbye, even temporarily, was not easy. Yet he knew that this was the right decision. The child had been given the tools, love, and support needed to thrive, and now it was time for him to continue his journey with professional care and the ongoing support of his community. The women spoke quietly among themselves, expressing gratitude for the man's kindness and dedication. They recognized the rare and precious bond he had formed with the child, and thanked him for giving the child safety, nourishment, and emotional stability when it was needed most. The man nodded humbly, understanding that what he had done was simple in action but profound in effect. Compassion, patience, and human connection had created a ripple of change in the life of a young child. The child, now comfortable with the staff, began to explore his new surroundings. He met other children, participated in small activities, and slowly began to smile more openly. The man watched from a distance, heart swelling with quiet pride. He knew the child would face challenges, but he also knew that the foundation they had built, trust, care, and love, would carry him forward. The three women stayed with him for a while, reinforcing the lessons of safety, respect, and courage. Their presence provided continuity, helping the child transition with confidence and comfort. Over the next few weeks, the man visited the child whenever possible. Each visit was filled with joy, laughter, and shared stories. The child spoke of his experiences at the care center, the new friends he had made, and the lessons he had learned. He still clung to the man and the women for comfort, but he had grown resilient, strong and confident. The man saw how much he had changed, no longer a frightened, starving child, but a young person capable of hope, trust, and joy. The women also remained involved, visiting regularly and helping maintain the child's connection to his heritage. They told stories of his family, taught him traditional songs, and ensured that he understood his culture and roots. Together, the man and the women created a network of care that surrounded the child with love, respect, and safety. The child, in turn, learned to trust and appreciate the world around him, understanding that kindness and human connection could exist even after hardship. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, the man sat quietly in the care center, watching the child play. He reflected on the journey they had taken together, the moment he first found the child alone and starving, the days of nurturing and care, the arrival of the three women, and finally, the transition to a stable and loving environment. Each step had been filled with patience, courage, and compassion. And in that quiet moment, he realized the profound truth that even small acts of kindness could create lasting change. The child ran up to him, holding a small drawing he had made. It showed the cabin, the creek, and the man and the women standing together. "Look," he exclaimed. "This is us." The man smiled, kneeling to embrace him. "It's perfect," he said softly. "And it will remind you that you are loved and safe always." The child hugged him tightly, feeling the security and love that had been built over weeks of care, patience, and trust. As the evening grew darker, the man and the women sat together, sharing quiet conversation. They spoke of the child's progress, their hopes for his future, and the bonds they had formed. There was a sense of accomplishment, but also humility, an understanding that they had been part of something larger than themselves. Their actions had created a foundation for the child's life, one built on love, trust, and compassion. The story of the child's rescue and care spread quietly through the community. Neighbors and friends heard of the man's kindness, the women's dedication, and the child's remarkable progress. People were inspired, seeing how human connection and empathy could transform lives. The man remained humble, knowing that he had simply done what anyone would hope to do, help another human being in need. Yet the impact of his actions resonated far beyond the cabin, touching hearts and inspiring hope. Months later, the child was thriving. He had developed friendships, learned new skills, and begun to embrace life with confidence. Visits from the man and the women continued, reinforcing the bonds of trust and care that had been established. The child's laughter, once rare and fragile, now filled rooms and spaces with joy. He had grown resilient, compassionate, and happy, a testament to the power of kindness, patience, and unwavering care. The man often reflected on that first day, when he had found the child alone and hungry. He realized that one small act, offering food, safety, and attention, had set into motion a series of events that had transformed a life. And the arrival of the three women had shown him that collaboration, understanding, and shared love could amplify the impact of even the simplest actions. Together, they had created a story of hope, healing, and human connection that would last a lifetime. As the sun set over the plains, the man walked home slowly, carrying with him the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference. The child's laughter echoed in his mind, a reminder that even in the face of hardship, courage, kindness, and love could prevail. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but the ending was bright, filled with hope, and rich with the bonds of trust and care that would endure. And though the child's future remained full of unknowns, the foundation had been laid. He would grow, thrive, and remember the people who had saved him, nurtured him, and taught him that the world could be a safe and loving place. The man smiled quietly to himself, knowing that this story, one of compassion, courage, and human connection, would stay with him forever, a testament to the power of kindness and the enduring strength of the human spirit.